In Germany, in 1923, people threw bundles of cash into their stoves to stay warm. The banknotes burned longer than the firewood the same money could buy. The paper had become worth more as fuel than as money. Berlin, winter of 1923. Inside a freezing apartment, a woman opens the door of her iron stove and pushes in a thick handful of banknotes. She is not destroying her money. She is simply trying to stay warm. Look closely at what is burning. Those same notes, taken to the shop, would buy less firewood than the flames they now make. The paper had become a cheaper fuel than the wood it could pay for. Step back into the street outside. A shopkeeper stands at his window with a piece of chalk, rubbing out the morning's prices and writing higher ones, and he will do it again before evening. The numbers cannot stay still long enough to be trusted. Inside the homes, people had found another use for their cash. They pasted stacks of marks across their walls as wallpaper because the paper money was now cheaper than the patterned paper sold in the shops. Children stacked bundles of notes into towers on the floor, building with money the way they might build with wooden blocks. A whole country had quietly agreed that its money was now just paper to play with. So here is the question that should stop you. How does a fortune, a whole lifetime of careful savings, end up worth less than a single loaf of bread? Because, at the worst of it, that is exactly what happened. This was not a freak accident. It was the violent, sped-up version of a force that is working on your money right now, running quietly at around 2 or 3% a year, slow enough that most people never feel it move. This is the story of how trusted money died in a matter of months. Rewind a few years to before the war. The German mark is one of the steadiest currencies in the world. 1 American dollar buys about 4 marks, and that number barely moves from one year to the next. Picture a middle-class clerk in those years. He puts a little aside each month, calm and certain. He knows, without a shadow of doubt, that the money he saves today will still buy the same goods next year and the year after that. But here is the strange truth at the heart of all of this. That paper in his hands holds value for one reason only, because everyone around him agrees that it does. Trust is the floor the whole thing stands on. Take that away, and the paper is just paper. Then came the 11th of November, 1918. The guns fell silent. The war was over, and Germany had lost. After 4 years of fighting, the country was exhausted, hungry, and deeply in debt because it had paid for the war not with taxes, but with borrowed money. Then the bill arrived. The Treaty of Versailles demanded that Germany pay 132 billion gold marks to the victors. That was a staggering number, roughly 3 times everything the entire country produced in a year. Now the government faced a choice. It could raise taxes high enough to pay painful, unpopular, slow, or it could simply print more money to cover its costs and its debts. Printing felt easy. It felt almost free. And everyone told themselves the same comforting lie that this was harmless, that you could make money out of thin air and nothing bad would follow. They were about to learn, in the worst possible way, exactly what that costs. Here is the simple engine behind it all. When there are more notes, but no more bread, no more shoes, no more coal, each note has to fight harder to buy the same thing, so each one buys a little less. And so the printing presses became the most important machines in the country. Day and night they rolled, feeding the government's hunger for cash, and every fresh sheet that left them made every old note in every pocket worth a little less. At first, the slide felt almost bearable. By the middle of 1922, 1 American dollar cost 320 marks. Prices stung. People grumbled, but they adjusted, the way you learn to walk on a floor that tilts. Then the floor dropped. By December 1922, that same dollar cost not 300, but 7,400 marks. A single loaf of bread was now around 160 marks. And here is the cruel part. The people hurt first, and worst were the careful ones, the savers, the pensioners, those living on a fixed sum that did not grow. Every week, the same number of marks bought a little less. Imagine an old man who had saved every spare mark for 40 years, planning a quiet retirement. He counts his notes, and they are all still there, the same pile, the same numbers, yet each month that pile buys less food than the month before. He told himself it would steady. It always had. But the numbers were not steadying, they were beginning to run, and what came next would not be measured in months. It would be measured in days, then hours. The 9th of January, 1923. The frost still clung to the streets of the Ruhr, Germany's iron and coal country, when foreign boots marched in. France and Belgium had run out of patience. Germany had fallen behind on its payments, so they came to take the value by force. The German answer was not gunfire, it was silence. Workers across the region simply stopped a great refusal called passive resistance. Furnaces cooled, conveyor belts halted, and the loudest engine in the country went quiet on purpose. But silent workers still had to eat. So the government in Berlin made a choice that would haunt it. It would pay the striking millions anyway, and it would pay them the only way it now knew how, by printing. The leak became a flood. Now the numbers did not slide. They fell off a cliff. In January, a single dollar cost about 17000 marks. By July, that same dollar cost 353000. Prices were no longer changing by the year, or even the day. They changed by the hour. Picture a wife sent out with a basket to buy flour. She knew the price when she left home. By the time she reached the counter, an hour later, it had doubled. The money in her hand was dying between her front door and the shop. Shopkeepers gave up keeping up. They locked their doors in the middle of the day, not for lunch, but to climb a ladder and rewrite every single price. By the time they reopened, those new numbers were already wrong. This was the line money was never supposed to cross. A coin, a note, a banknote. It only works if it sits still long enough to be used. In the summer of 1923, German money stopped sitting still. It stopped behaving like money at all, and the worst was still ahead. By the autumn of 1923, factories paid their workers twice a day, because a single day's delay could cut the money in half. The moment the cash hit a worker's hand, the race was on. At the factory gates, wives waited every afternoon. The husband would pass the bundle through the railings, and the woman would sprint for the shops before the prices changed again. In a cafe, a student sat down and ordered a coffee marked at 5,000 marks. He drank it slowly, talked with a friend, and asked for a second cup. The price was now 7,000. When money cannot hold its value for an afternoon, people stop trusting it at all. So Germans went back to the oldest trade of all goods for goods. They called it barter. A family might trade a fine piano for a sack of potatoes. Jewelry went for eggs, furniture for bread. The treasured things of a comfortable life were swapped for a single meal. The paper itself grew so worthless that people hauled their wages home in wheelbarrows and laundry baskets. One famous tale: a thief tipped the cash onto the ground and stole the empty basket instead. And the old pensioner from before? The careful savings of an entire lifetime could no longer buy him a single loaf of bread. Yet, somehow, the madness still had further to climb. Then came the autumn of 1923, and the numbers stopped making sense. A single loaf of bread now cost 200 billion marks. Say that number aloud, and it means nothing, and that was exactly the point. This was the promise being paid off in full. Every careful saving, every fortune built over a lifetime, had quietly turned into fuel paper worth more in a stove than in a wallet. By November, $1 American was worth around 4 trillion marks. There is no gentle way to say it. The German mark, once trusted across the world, was dead. Into this ruin stepped a quiet, exacting man named Hjalmar Schacht. His answer was almost laughably simple. Throw out the old money and start again. He introduced a brand new currency, the Rentenmark, where a single new mark replaced 10 trillion old ones. And here is the strange part. The new money worked not because of gold or magic, but because people believed there would only ever be a limited amount of it. Trust, the very thing that had died, was reborn almost overnight. The printing presses fell silent. Prices stopped climbing within days. A nightmare that had built for years simply ended because money is, in the end, only a shared belief, and belief had returned. But do not mistake this for a freak event from a faraway century. What Germany lived through was nothing more than ordinary inflation at terrifying speed. The same force never disappeared. It only slowed down to where you stopped seeing it work. Step out of 1923 and look at the money in your own pocket. Prices still climb. Your money still loses value every year. The only difference is the speed today. It slips away at maybe 2 or 3% a year, slow enough that you barely feel it. Most modern central banks even aim for about 2%. Picture a stack of cash tucked in a drawer, the number on each note never changing, but leave it there for 20 years while prices creep upward, and quietly, about a third of what it can buy simply disappears. The paper stays the same. The world around it grows more expensive. Run the simple arithmetic. 10,000 in cash, earning nothing, with prices rising 3% a year. After 10 years, it buys only about 7,500 worth of goods. Keep waiting, and the loss keeps growing slow, silent, and certain. And just like in Berlin, this slow drain has its quiet winners and its quiet losers. Governments and anyone who owes money come out ahead. Their old debts shrink, repaid in cheaper money that is easier to find. The same divide as 1923, only gentler. On the other side stand the savers and the pensioners living on a fixed income. Their careful, unchanging money buys a little less each year, and there is nothing they can do to make it grow. The people who trusted the rules lose the most. Here is the strangest part. This slow loss is not an accident. Modern central banks aim for that little bit of inflation on purpose. If money slowly loses value, people are nudged to spend it and invest it rather than hoard it in a drawer. So the wheels of the economy keep turning. So the force that turned a fortune into fuel was never killed. It was tamed, kept on a leash, a controlled echo of the thing that once ran wild through Germany in a single year. It is still working on your money right now. The only question left is whether you can feel its pull. Look one last time at that flame in the Berlin stove, the banknote curling, browning, gone. The same fire that warmed a family by burning their fortune. That was the scream. Now picture a kitchen with the morning light coming in, a few bags of groceries on the counter. The same items as last year, costing a little more than you remember. Quieter, slower. But it is the same erosion. That is the feeling worth carrying. You are touching the very same force that once turned a lifetime of saving into wallpaper. It does not roar at you anymore. It only whispers. So remember the one thing: the year of the burning money paid for in full. Value does not sleep. Money left alone does not stay the same, even when the number on it never moves at all. Inflation is simply prices rising while money stays the same. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. There is always another one worth telling.